I thought I'd make a video because I uncovered something that was worth looking into about Julian's identical twin that was stolen from him at the very birthbed where my mother was in the hospital many years ago. Now, I talked about this so many times, I don't know the story to it. I just know that I was walking with Frankie and my dad far down the hall, and I saw some guy, and it was Lucio, that had taken the baby and walked right past my father. And I don't know what the story is. You know, feel like I'm very strongly believe that I know my father wouldn't have kicked us all out or said get rid of the kid. He wouldn't have not done that. But I wanted to talk about because I was looking at my birth certificate. Okay, this is the birth certificate where you get in the vital records, certification vital records in Dallas, Texas. This is like the official birth certificate that they give, and I keep it in the passport with all my other identifications. And I was looking at this birth certificate, and it says here, this birth, and you see all these little markings. It'll say like birth in city of town, Dallas, my full name, birthday, my dad's name, Hernandez, Palomo, Machinist, Texas, my mother's, who gave birth, Celestina Melendez. My mother's a homemaker, 1040 Osceola, Carrollton, Texas. My mother was 25 years old when she gave birth to me. So my mother was, at the time of birth, she's 25 years old. And I thought, oh, okay, but then I look, and it says here, this birth, this birth, single, twin, or triplet. It says single, meaning I'm not a twin. I'm a single child, right? I wasn't born a twin or a triplet or whatever. I was just one single birth. And I thought, wait a minute. I looked. I want to say that I think I remember. I don't know. I could be wrong about just slightly in my. I could be slightly wrong about what I remember this, but I want to say that I think I remember looking at Julian's birth certificate. And when, I don't know if my mother either told me I couldn't look at it or I just happened to look at it, and Julian's birth certificate says he's a single, not a twin. It says here when you give birth, like I'm 6 years older than Julian. So, you know, when they do these birth certificates, they're much more, you know, obviously 6 years down the road, they probably came up more of an authentic way to make sure if a baby's born, triplet, single, or twin. So when you register, when Julian's birth certificate said, if it says he's a single, that means the doctor or whatever it is, this doesn't make any sense. Doesn't the doctor or the nurse, I don't know if it's a doctor or the nurse, they have to write down, and it has to say whether it's a twin, single, right at the time, and they're the ones that actually give birth to the child. They're actually in the hospital, you know, doing what they do for women that are giving birth, and they write that down. Could they have possibly or intentionally written down the wrong identification to say that it was a single or maybe it was a twin? Not likely, because they don't know the drama. My father wasn't there. My mother was there in the hospital giving birth by herself, that I recall. I know that my father didn't just show up to the hospital, visit my mother giving birth, and then leave and then pick us up and take us back. My mother gave birth by herself, unless Lucio was with her while they were giving birth. So if my dad doesn't realize, because obviously he's like, oh, and I remember how we got an extra family member, and me and Frankie are walking down the hall and this baby walks by. Obviously he wouldn't have, if he was there at the beginning of birth and then came back and picked us up, he would have known it was a twin. Now, this doesn't make any sense. If my mother gave twins, the doctor couldn't have said, oh, there's two, they don't know the drama, so they just, oh, you're giving birth, let me write down twins or single, because they're not really interested in finding out, let's keep this baby a secret. It's none of those things. I just uncovered some very valuable information that I've never realized before about documentation. Because they had to have written twin. They've had to have written down that Julian was a twin. And the thing that I don't remember is, I want to say I remember looking at Julian's birth certificate, and I don't know if I either saw a twin or I didn't. I can't remember. It made me take me a long time to see if I can try to remember if there was something that on the paper I remember reading, if I did, that said Julian was a twin, or it just said single. But I'm trying to remember if my mother either prevented me from looking at the birth certificate, because it is a little confusing also on my birth certificate, because on my birth certificate it says here I think someone changed this birth certificate. They did. No, okay, because you look right here and it says Julian. It says Julian G. Carter, which that is attendance signature. So the person, I don't know if that is the official doctor, that whenever I was born into the world, I guess that was the assistant. Julian G. Doctor. Julian's name's there. But it's just Julian. That's just an attendant. It's not Julian, my brother. But he has the same name. So it's a little confusing whether. But I was thinking, regardless, whether I can try to remember whether it said single or twin. When you register for school at Good Elementary, they require a birth certificate. By the time that Julian enters school, Julian's born in 1989. I'm 6 to 7 years old when Julian is born. And Julian, I think kids register for school or enter school when they're about 4 to 5 years old. Kindergarten, I think, is 4 years old or 5 years old. Either or. 4 to 5 years old. So that would have made Julian entering school in the early 90s. 1992, 1993 would have been his kindergarten year. By that time, they require a birth certificate of some kind. And when they look at this birth certificate and they say, oh, it's Julian, this little kid's entering school, they would look to see if, in case they just didn't pay attention, or they happen to miss information by reading this, they would look at it and say, well, where's Julian's twin? He says here's a twin. But Julian's only by himself going to Good Elementary. Now, Julian went to Good Elementary all the way up until, because I went through Good Elementary all through kindergarten through grade school. All through grade school, I went to one school. And Julian moved out of the house when I was about 15 years old, I think. Was I 15? Yeah, I was like 14 to 15. I was about 15 years old when Julian moved to Garland. Maybe 16? Could have been 16. 15 or 16. But I'm going to say probably late 15 years old whenever it was my mom officially moved Julian. No, I think probably 16. Julian to Garland, right? Because I said I talked about this. My mother moved to Garland, and I'm thinking, if Julian went to Garland, he had to register for school again. By the time I'm 14 or 15 years old, for sure someone is finding out the information. What happened to this child? Because my dad commits suicide when I'm 12 years old, right before I turned 13. There's a full investigation because they think that my father could have been poisoned or murdered, to take his money, and they don't know that my mother could have been a bad person or good person, but they have to look into it. They look at the birth certificate. If it says single, well, then they'll never find out whether my mother had an identical twin child. And it would only be identified unless my mother had told the Child Protective Services or the investigators that I have another child somewhere. He's a twin. But if it says twin on his birth certificate, that means when he goes to Good Elementary, what other places do you have to bring your birth certificate as a mother to any professional place, whether a school or a doctor's office? And you have to show Julian's birth certificate to someone, and it says twin. What is the chances that they would have written single? Very unlikely. It's very likely that it would have said twin. It's very likely that, if a doctor is involved, and a nurse, and when you're giving birth, they make the birth certificates, at least during that time, almost immediately. Like as soon as they give birth, they write down, okay, they ask how old she is, the father, but that's what they write. Obviously, my biological fathers, they just put the father as Raymond Palomo, because there's no one else, which would make sense because they just, whatever guy that's there, they just put him as the father, because obviously the biological father. There's mothers all the time that don't have the biological father around. So, this is unearthed information. The birth certificate, Julian's birth certificate had to have said twin. It had to have. When he goes to a doctor's office, when Julian goes to a doctor's office to get a normal checkup, and he goes to that doctor's office, I don't think doctor's offices even require birth certificates. I think school does. I know school does require a birth certificate. I just didn't realize in this until I said, wait a minute, this documentation, it has to identify Julian. What are the chances that a doctor would have written down single for Julian when he was twins? Very unlikely. And the nurse, very unlikely, unless there was already a vendetta against my mother, a secret thing, and that's probably not the case. It's early 90s. It's most likely not the case. Because by early 90s, they have computers and, and things are being kept tracked pretty well by that time. So this means, and I can have access, and I think I can, I don't know if I have, I'm pretty sure I think I have, anyone can get a birth certificate. I don't know if I know everyone can get a death certificate, but I think I may have possible that I could retrieve Frankie, my immediate family member's birth certificate. I may be able to get a birth certificate from. Now I don't know if I can, because people impersonate other people's identities, and that's how people do false identity theft, because they get all the documentations of false identity theft and they start stealing people's credit cards and numbers, and that's how they steal their money, because they pose themselves as someone else. And this entirely says the Julian's birth certificate has to say twin. So why is it that Julian goes up until he's about 12 years old that he's about 12 years old when he finds out he has an identical twin. Why is it that he goes to school? I think I think that my dad's suicide, when they investigated it, and that's whenever they found out, around that time, that my mother had an identical twin. I think that's when they found, because they would have been like, because my mother was getting persecuted not only by Sarah and Ken, but also they were gooning up on my mother. Robert Paloma was. And I remember my mother was like petrified. Like, they were very nasty to my mother growing up. Like, they were very disrespectful and disgusting to her. They were treating her like she was a stupid bitch. That's exact. And they were very expressive, vocally, and very physically expressive, that she was just a stupid lady. She was just a stupid person from Mexico. But this makes perfect sense. It maybe take me a long time to remember, but I don't know if I'll be able to remember. Rather, I want to say I remember at least, there had to have been at least one time I looked at Julian's birth certificate. Because I recall my mother keeping all the items. Like, my mother used to keep fingernails, hair. She has my circumcision skin, which is a ring, that she kept, and she kept it for souvenirs. That's what all mothers do. All mothers are like that. They're very attaching to their children like that, and they keep baby pictures. When they're 90 years old. So I remember my mother showing them to me several times when I was a kid, and we used to keep old Christmas gifts in a luggage bag, and we kept it in the attic. And when Christmas and she kept another bag for souvenirs. Julian's hair, a lock of Julian's hair, a lock of my hair, Frankie's as well, I think. And I don't think my mother did that with Frankie, because maybe my mother was too young and she had just given birth, and I don't know who Julian's biological father may be. But this is very unearthed. This is very earth groundbreaking information, documentation. Julian's birth certificate has to say twin. It has to. I mean, I'm not saying that there could possibly say single, because she gave birth to twins. They wheeling her into the hospital, and then they say some person that wasn't inside the hospital room comes in, the nurse says, "How many babies did you have?" "I had one." My mother lies, which is not likely. That you're giving birth to life. And let me tell you something. Julian, to my understanding, was circumcised as well. And my father requested a circumcision. He requested a circumcision with me, Frankie, and Julian, all of us. So my father requested, but he wasn't there for the birth of Julian. So, but I don't know, by the early 90s, I don't know if they were already requesting it for all male children to be circumcised. Or my mother probably would have done that just because me and Frankie did. But I know that is very highly sensitive information to think, well, if they did something like that, they're going to write the right information on here. It's going to say twin. Because when we went in that hospital bed, my mother had one child, and I talked about it was a far stretch down a hall, and they were walking past us, and he had the baby, and he walked right past us. And my dad looked at him like, "Are you just coming out of the room we were supposed to go in?" And he gave him a weird look, like just looking at him, like, and just kind of slowed down and look at him, like he was just kind of pondering what this guy was doing. And we just kept on walking, and just ignored it, and just kept on walking. Julian's birth certificate, if it says twin, why is it that nobody, when he's going to school, how many times do you go to a field trip? How many times do you go to some place that requires a birth certificate? I know like I'm almost 100%. When you register for school in the, for such a long time, when you register for school in the early 90s, you have to bring a birth certificate. You can't register a child for school unless you have a birth certificate, and you have to have an original birth certificate. As a matter of fact, I think I remember being in school. I remember being at Good Elementary, and I was either going there with Julian, or I was with my mother or my dad, or I overheard, and I was there, and they said we need a original birth certificate. They require not a copy, but an original birth certificate for a child to enroll in school for the first time, because it's mandatory. And I'm trying to remember if I think it's, if I walked in and I was there with my mother, that's too far of the past to try to remember that. I might be, because the build of the office, I'm trying to think if I went in the office and they noticed it says twin, and my mother said, oh, he's living somewhere else. And my mother was always kind of trying to protect us and would lie to people in order to protect the children about other predators, because my mother knew that this is how I give my exchanges away. I sell you a baby, I don't want to get beaten, because I don't know the story. If my mother got threatened by Lucio, or there was a woman that threatened my mother and says, don't say nothing, give us a child, we'll take care of it, that puts my mother at hostage, because this doesn't make any sense. My mother, I talked about that my mother used to cry when she would see these two identical twins that lived like 4 or 5 houses down from us, between Sequoia Street on Osceola and the street closest to our house. I don't remember the name of it, but I talked about it's right next to the alley, to the sewage alley. It's one of the houses, and there used to be twins walking. They would walk home from school from Good Elementary. There was 2 black girls. I talked about this. They always wore shorts, and they were real tall, long-legged. They were real tall. They were like tall family members, tall kids. And I remember both of them walking, and my mother would get emotional. And she would be looking out the window, and she would be standing outside on the front porch, and she would do this, and she would be like, oh, mira, son, oh, and she would look at me like, oh, look, there's some twins, you know. And she would sit down on the couch, and I remember her building up tears. If she's perfectly comfortable with somebody taking your child, is she crying because she wishes she had enough money to put the twins together? Or is she crying because she's being held hostage, saying she has to give up that child or else somebody else is going to do something to her or the child that she has? She's hoping one day to hopefully reunite Julian, which was a success. But it doesn't change the fact that why is she crying? Is this because she's scared? They're telling me, and I'm having a bunch of people random telling me that my mother willingly and wanted to give that child up. That means that's not the truth. I know my father would have not thrown away the child. He would not have done that. But I remember being at the sonogram whenever I was with my father and my mother, and I want to say my mother said they think they say twins, and I thought my father was there, and I'm trying to think to myself, because if my father was gay and he's basically scavenging off because he's a homosexual and wants a family, and he just, what are you going to give me, what are you going to give me, and this is just how life is, then why is it that he's going to the birth hospital bed and he's not questioning that? Because I told my mother, and my father's a registered nurse, so I don't remember exactly, but they said that I remember being in the hospital bed with my mother, and my mother was pregnant with with Julian, and me, Frankie, and my dad were in the hospital. We're in the clinic, and he says, and the lady's kind of scanning my mother's stomach, and she says, "It's a twin." She says, I think there are twins. Yeah, I think there is. And I remember, yeah, I think there is. So, could my father have believed that maybe there was one of the children of the twins died, and that's why there was one? He didn't say nothing? Or is it because it's just, well, that's just what we got in life. That's just what we get in life. But this doesn't make any sense. This is the most evidence information that you're ever going to hear about documentation when it comes to Julian's birth identical twin. What I'm trying to see if I can remember how, if it's possible, when Julian was registered for school, and I don't know if I saw the lady, and I think it was a woman, or it was some kind of female looking person. Says, oh, he's a twin. Is he? And my mother said, oh no, he goes to school somewhere else. He's somewhere else. And my mother was just trying to shrug it off. So there's several years that when they know that I met Michael Jackson, when they know that my father's very old, they have to look at their birth certificate and file that they made a copy of and kept the copy of it in their cabinet. At Good Elementary, there's a teacher, there's a principal, a homosexual that wants to, find out and keep it a secret and let the transgender keep Julian's twin, or whoever did. They can look at it and say, yeah, he is identical twin. So she lied, and nobody said anything for several years, and they knew about it. So there is a lot of corruption involved, whoever's doing this. Whoever was involved, the documentation has to say twin. It has to say twin. It has to say twin because that's what the birth certificate says. There's no way that you're going to give birth to twins and the doctor isn't going to write single. The chances of the doctor being a homosexual is very highly likely because there's no straight men at all that are doctors. Or you got maybe 1 out of 1,000. Because for some reason the education levels, for some reason heterosexual men, straight men don't go to school and become doctors. For some reason, I don't know why. I don't know, it's just a lack of intelligence and ability to want to go to school, or just that's the way the straight man lives, is that we just give birth, we're just cattle breeders, and then the homosexuals use us, and that's what they do, just like they use the women. But this makes perfect, this absolutely is very important information. Wherever Michaela, whoever it is, I mean, obviously everything's all old news, but the paper, how did Julian register for school? Because I'm trying to remember if I was, because I went there for school and Julian registered for school, and she says, and I don't know if she said, he says, oh, he's a twin, and looked at Julian, looked at my mother, and said, oh no, he goes somewhere, and she was just, because my mother kept very secret about it. She was very secretive about it. So not only does this make it look like my father, Raymond Palomo, he's a registered nurse. You're telling me he's a registered nurse and he doesn't think enough to himself? That he doesn't know that they're scanning my mother's stomach to find out if she's a twin? And the doctor said, I was there. I remember saying that. I think they said, yeah, you got twins or something. So, if the doctor says, if I'm there, and I remember this because I know that the doctor said twins as well, and I can confirm it even more because I remember walking with my mother out of the clinic after her finding out, scanning her stomach, and she was sort of dragging her feet like this. And I already made a video about this, but she was walking very slow, and she was she was very disappointed. She was like disappointed, like what am I going to do? She was like, what am I going to do? I have twins now. And I remember looking at my mother's face because I was turned around and I was walking in front of her to look at my mother, and I looked at my father to the side. And my father was very clear, and he was just looking at my mother like, yeah, that's just what we do. And I remember that, and Frankie was right behind, several feet behind my dad. And I talked about this, that I was looking for Frankie, and I said, where's Frankie? Because I didn't see Frankie, because I'm thinking, oh, we're a family and all. And then I heard Frankie say, I'm here, I'm right here. I was like, oh, okay. And I look, and I kind of go back there, and I see that he's there. He's like real close to my dad, behind him. So when my father gives birth, and we go to the hospital bed, and there's only one baby, the only option that he would have thought is if there was a miscarriage. I don't know how that works with children. If there was a miscarriage with one of the child and the twin survived, the other twin survived, I don't know how that works. But my father, I don't remember, I know 100% he didn't question it while I was there. So when we leave and we get to the house with one child, how is it that my father, this is even more groundbreaking information. Is it possible that my father at least once or twice in his entire life, knowing Julian and my mother, in the entire existence of Julian's life, at a doctor's appointment, school, whatever it was, that he looked at the birth certificate and it said twin, and he didn't question it? So what does this say? What does this say about the identical twin being stolen? Either my father, I don't believe that my father would have gone along with it. Obviously he's been deceased for a very long time. I'm not going to cover up for him. I'm not. But I believe that the way that he was is just, well, that's just what we got, what I got in life, what I get to have in life. What makes this so disturbing too is, when they went through the medical records, if I met Michael Jackson before Julian was born, they had to have gone through the birth certificates and documentation. They found out where we lived. They found out about Miguel. They found out what Miguel did to Frankie when I was very young. It was after the Michael Jackson experience that all these other people started showing up. The police department knew for several years. But Julian doesn't go and reunite with his twin until he's 12 years old. Obviously, it takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of money. Like, if somebody took the child, like, not only you have to have child protective services involved, but you have to, what are you going to do whenever you uncover and say somebody stole the child? Like, okay, well, you gave the child up, the child is fine in some other city and going to school somewhere else, whether it's a transgender and a gay, it's taken care of. Well, that's just life, right? How are you going to reunite Julian with his identical twin? You have to have a lot of money to buy a house. So how would you put that family together? You have to spend a lot of money. You have to have a lot of money. That's the only way you can do it. That's the only way you can do it. Because they're also going to break up that relationship with that other family over there. And they're going to be pissed because you're taking their child away. Then you would have to ask my mother, did you give this child up, or did somebody hit you or beat you just not saying anything? Did somebody hit you or beat you not to say anything? Now let me say something about this deceased little girl, Marissa Miranda, that was my mother's daughter, who's my only biological sister, from the same mother and same father. Michaela has a different mother than me. She's my half sister by blood. This means when I was 7 years old, I was in second grade when Ivan moved in to our neighbor's house. And I was 7 to 8 years old. Early 7 to 8 years old. Early 8 years old, I remember being in second grade. I was in second grade when Ivan moved in, and I think it was toward the end of the year of second grade. Now you can look up this documentation. Now, if I'm in second grade and Ivan moves in and he's in third grade because he's a grade above me, within a couple of months, or they move in, there's a little girl that moves in that I don't know is my biological sister, and this is my mother's daughter. If that child moves in, that wasn't a coincidence. How could you possibly have put in that child right there and not get identity? Because Julian, if you put that child there, whoever decided to take care of that family, whoever spent the money, I'm 7 years old. For the next 5 years, from 7 to 12 years old, my dad committed suicide at 12 years old. Why is nobody reuniting Julian with his twin? They have to do probably a thorough investigation. Like, they have to look into it, to what's going on. For 5 years, they allow these people to keep the child. But they have to, because not only my father, did they tell my father? My father, Raymond Palomo, he never knew that my mother's daughter was right next door to us. So did he even know Julian was right next? Because I remember he used to look at this little girl walk in front of our house daily for many years. It was a common thing. And he never once knew about it or said anything that I'm aware of. Never said anything to me about it. So they keep shooting me in my crotch, on the side of my leg, making my muscle tissue twitch to zap me, and that's all they're fucking doing is they're shooting me, and they're just controlling me and controlling me, and that's who you have sex with, and that's what color skin you get your privates for, and that's what you get, and that's what they're doing to me as I'm talking about birth and sex, vagina and twins and all this, as I'm talking about this. And I just felt them shoot me on the corner of my eyes so that I start itching my own eyes. But I wanted to say this. The birth certificate, Julian's birth certificate has to say twin. So for 5 years, Julian, I'm 12 years old, so Julian doesn't move out of my house. He doesn't move out of my mom's and dad's house until I'm about 15 years old to 16 years old. So for 15 years, I don't know when Julian reunited with his twin. I believe it had to have been right after my dad's suicide. That's what I think happened. Because when my dad commits suicide, and I'm 12 years old, they immediately tell my mother, okay, tell us right now, how many kids do you have? My mother's married to my dad. Where are the kids? Let me take a look at the birth certificate. They can tell we all look different. So we're all my mother's basically a cattle breeder, but she's the mother of us. She takes care of us. So what happens? What happens is that my mother, I'm sure, has to give the birth certificate to the authorities or the Child Protective Services when I'm 12 years old. And they look at it, and it'll say Julian is a twin. So that was the only way that because nobody questioned it. Nobody wanted to. Everybody knew about Miguel raping Frankie and punching him and possibly punching me. I just remember collapsing on the ground. Everybody kept him safe. Everybody knew about that. The school, the rapes, good elementary, all the teachers, everyone knew about that, and they kept it low hush hush in the police. Everyone knew about it. So why isn't anybody doing anything? Or no authorities, no personal information ever came to my mother. Okay, so if nobody ever came to my mother, nobody questioned it, but they questioned this guy raping Frankie, never arrested him. Okay, because he's going to get in trouble and you're going to question. Guess what? You have children? Oh wait, we heard about this guy raping Frankie. Now even more people in the authorities know about it. That's how they want to cover it up. And the authorities wanted to cover it up, because when the authorities find out that whose baby got stolen and how many babies you have, it's very likely that the topic of that rapist over there, a child rapist, that he's kept in a 3-bedroom house, very comfortable, giving him a car, giving him 2 cars, and letting him have jobs with his transgender wife. Guess what? Bingo. Let's not say nothing. Let's just wait and just let it until time passes by. We got to keep him safe and give him a job and he's comfortable. That's what they're doing. I'm 12 years old. $175,000. The house is paid off. My dad's money. We get a brand new car. Who bought that car for my mother? Because my dad committed suicide, remember? They had to have questioned. My mother would have probably eventually, she would have spilt the beans on that. She would have spilt the beans on that identical twin. She would have. I know she would have. She would have been like, there's a twin. Stop shooting me. She would have said, she would have said to the authorities, stop, fucking asshole, they're shooting my brain right now. They're shooting me with an electronic device. It's hitting the brain tissue or the muscles in my back of my brain. They're shooting me with some sort of fucking electronic device. But, like I said, Julian, when I was 12 years old, it probably took him at least, after that my father's suicide, it took him at least a couple of years. Because when my father committed suicide, within that same year, within 12 months of that time is when this little girl died, my mother's daughter, and my biological sister, my biological father Hector, that's when his daughter died. That means when a child dies and you have a twin that's stolen and a man that commits suicide and all this money, they're going to question my mother to the fullest. They just know that she's just a cattle breeder. They just look at her and she's just from Mexico, poor education. It's just family, and that's sex and love, and that's what you do. She doesn't get a quality life. She doesn't get to go to school and all these fancy. Because that's what homosexuals do. That's what faggots do. That's how they think about straight people. Oh, you just babies, and you just babies, and you just make babies, and that's life. You see love in babies, and then you're not good because we put gay in there, and he knows what family is. That's the way they think about family. So, Julian's birth certificate. So when I was 12 years old, for sure they've had to have found out Julian was identical twin. That was probably by the authorities, Child Protective Services. There had to have been an investigation at that. There had to have been a child. There had to have been. So if they did that, my mom moves out when I'm about 15 or 16 years old. Right? The little girl dies, there's not a proper burial. So if Julian moves out when I'm about 16 years old, officially moves out, because I remember the dog dying, and then I remember I was late 16 years old, somewhere around 16 years old, when my mother left me at the 3-bedroom house, and she was leaving only on when I was 15 years old. She would only leave on weekends with Julian. And then when I was 16 years old, somewhere around 16 years old, right before I turned 17, I don't know when I was, somewhere when I was 16 years old, my mother moved out completely and left me at the house by myself. And I would walk home, and nobody would be home. I was just abandoned. I was an abandoned kid. So when I was 17 years old, when I turned 17, late 16 years old, my mother permanently moved out. So my mother, when I was 16 years old, she'd move out. From 15 to 16, she was moving out on weekends, and then she'd leave for 2 weeks, and then come back and leave for 1 week, and then would come back to Lucio's house, the guy that stole the child. So I don't know what secret life that there were happening over there. So they must have been doing some sort of reuniting twin experience. They must have been doing some reuniting twin experience. I don't know. They didn't tell me anything. They kept me out of the loop. So what happens is, I'm 17 years old, I'm by myself. I was living by myself. I was basically begging to other friends to have some sort of companionship because I had nothing. All my friends were feeling sad and were like, damn it, you always got problems. Where the fuck's your mother? And they would always say that to me. Like, you're just left by yourself to abandon, you just fend for your fucking self. I knew nothing. My father's dying in a fucking nursing home. So, not only whoever got involved, there's no hope. I mean, you have to have straight women and the straight men 100%, and groups of them, because the faggots and the transgenders, they're so vengeful, and they're by far more better fighters than because they only seek of the breeding of what we do, because they don't have sex, they don't have heterosexual sex, they only have sex with gays, and they're transgenders. They can't give birth. They don't give actual birth to children. So the viciousness of Michael Jackson and the cover-up would have all been involved with them, and the likeliness of them wanting any heterosexual females or any straight men to get involved would have ruined their plan, because they would have been like, this motherfucker, because the faggots, all they did is help this transgender and Miguel. That's all they fucking did. They were living in a $150,000 fucking house. You looked at how nice their house looked like. They lived in their yard. They were giving them jobs. In fact, Diana started working as a substitute teacher. They were helping them. When my father commits suicide, within a few months is when she slaps my mother and drops her to the floor. And I don't know that this happens. She just walks in and is doing this, and she doesn't want to tell me, and there's no signs for any reason that this woman would have hit my mother. There's not. You got to understand that this person's claiming they're a Christian and God, and they're talking to my mother in conversation, adult talk, when I'm a kid. I just know that Diana's always making fun of my mother all the time in the driveway. She's always making fun of her, like playing her stupid, and I constantly look at my mother, and I'm like, and then I look at Diana like, it's just kind of a weird conversation, because she looks at my mother particularly like, stupid, and she was just like, just exactly of what transgenders hate heterosexual people for, because they want to be able to make babies and do what they want, and they sort of envy the straight community, thinking that is, that it's such a downfall for them. So then they retaliate for something that we have no responsibility or connections to. It's not our fault we're born straight, but they hate us for it, and they want to be vengeful for it, thinking that, that we use this as an advantage against them. But that's the way they think. That's how they always behave. But this makes it real vengeful about what they went after my mother for, because they knew about that rape the whole time. Why? Julian's birth certificate. Julian's birth certificate. Take a look at Julian's birth certificate, and if it says twin, if his birth certificate, which is like an 80 to 90% chance that the doctor didn't make that mistake, or the nurse, whoever wrote the birth certificate, and it says twin, because I want to say, this is what it's going to take me probably a while, hopefully I can remember. My mother says to the front desk when we're enrolling Julian in kindergarten, and I was there with my mother, and I don't know if my father was there. Father could have been there. I'm trying to remember if he was there or not. The lady looks at the birth certificate, and she goes, "Oh, he's a twin." And my mother immediately, she doesn't want, I can tell by looking at her body language, she doesn't want me to know if I can remember this. And she has her back face toward me, and she tells the lady as she's at the front desk, and there's really no one around, there's a couple people over there, and she says, "Oh no, yeah, he's twin, he's over there, he knows, don't worry about it, he's over there." And the lady's like, oh, okay. And he goes, "No, it's just," and she says, and this is how my mother is when she's trying to hide the information, because she doesn't want other predators to go after her children. This is why my mother doesn't want Sarah Cooper involved, because of that behavior. If my mother, because she's telling the lady, he's like, "Oh no, don't worry about it," and she's shrugging it off very quickly, like she always did when I was living with her. And I said, I talked about this coming home from church, and I asked, she told me that Julian was a twin, but she shrugged it off in a way that, like, I really didn't understand what she was trying to say. Like, and she's like, "Oh, he's twin Garland." That's what she says. She doesn't make full sentences about it. She just, "Oh, that's Garland, Julian, twin, yeah. And I'm like, what? So if that is the case, who was that lady? Was it a transgender? Was it a I want to say I think it was a heterosexual lady, but I don't know. It was too long ago, and I couldn't tell back then. There's no way in the information I could tell whether it was a heterosexual or not. Because they know, the transgenders know they just steal children. They just they steal children. It's a common thing heterosexuals know. She's a transgender, and she looks at my mother and she says, "Oh, you only have one child." "Oh, maybe somebody else transgender took the child. I gotta fight for my breed." And that's the way that they are. So they would have tried to shrug it off. Keep going, keep going. Yeah, that's what we get out of you. That's what we get out of you. Remember, if the person was a transgender, if it's a heterosexual woman, she must have had to let it just bypass her, because heterosexual women, if they know that a child is a twin, they emotionally get involved very vigorously. If a real heterosexual woman feels a lot of empathy and a lot of understanding and compassion toward a situation like that, tremendously. Heterosexual transgenders don't understand what the fuck empathy and emotion, they don't understand any of that fucking shit. They're just vengeful to see what they can steal and take. Specifically with this subject, it's not the same. So this is earth-breaking document information. If Julians, because the thing is I'm trying to vividly, I remember Julian being there, because Julian used to have Barney the dinosaur shoes, and when he used to watch Barney the dinosaur, and we're walking in school, and I remember, I don't know if I remember enough, because it was, you got to understand, this is like 35 years ago. There's not, Julian enrolled, I was 11 to 10 years old when Julian enrolled in school. But I want to say we walked in, and I don't remember if my father was there or he was walking in late. Like, go into there, I'll be in there in a second, and then my mom tells, and then my father walks in, or my mom was just the only one there and she drove us there. But my mother doesn't have enough education to communicate with these people, so my father had to have been there, because my mom doesn't have the education. She has such a poor education and communication ability with people when it comes to documentation and being all professional with documents and trying to enroll in school and what do you need this and what do you need that. She doesn't understand that by that time very well at all. My mother hadn't started working at Stanley Tools by then. So this means that my mother, I want to say that she lied to the person, or that she just shrugged it off very quickly, because I looked at her, I looked at my mother, and I was like, and I didn't understand even what twin was, like, very clearly at 10 years old. I'm not sure if I understood that, because it just comes out of the nowhere, and I thought they could have been talking about something else. To a 10-year-old in the world that I grew up in with my mother, I don't understand any of this documentation. I don't understand it. It's very professional. It's very highly educated. I don't understand it. I just know they say certain words that I kind of pick up on. But the only thing I can say, was that person a transgender or not? I don't know. But I want to say that my mother shrugged it off very quickly, and she sort of had her back face toward me, kind of like protecting us as kids, and she was sort of on the side front desk and like standing at this like desk, and she goes, "Oh no, he's a gardener." No, and she was just, because she knows that kids always have big mouths to talk about how they feel and what's going on in their life. Everybody knows about that. And one example I could tell you this, you can ask Julian about this. When I was a kid, my father committed suicide. He pulled a knife on Frankie. And I talked about this in so many videos. Cops showed up, and that's when he drank all those pills to try to commit suicide. Well, when I went to school, later, the next few days, and over the next few weeks, and first month, Julian told the teacher, this is what Julian did. Julian told the teacher, and I've never shared this information before, when I'm going, this is what I've never shared this information before that I recall. I could have before. Julian told the teachers that my dad pulled a knife on Frankie. And the way that happened is I was talking to Miss Lowry. I was in CM. And Miss Lowry and they started gossiping or whatever. And she said, "Did your dad pull a knife? Did your dad pull a knife on Frankie?" And I looked and I said, "No." And I was mad because I was like, what the fuck did Julian just say? What did Julian just say? And I remember looking at Julian, and I walked down the hall, and he knew that I was mad because I got cornered by some of the teachers like I had done something wrong. And I remember being upset, like, what is Julian doing? Like, they're going to come after our family. Like, what did you tell? They're going to break us all apart, because I was scared that they were going to break us all apart. When I was a kid, there was already all this escalation that my father was going to divorce. My father was on the verge of kicking my mother out with Frankie and Julian. And I talked about this, that my mother put a bunch of boxes by the door, and my dad would be drunk, and he says, "All right, well, if you decide to move out, Hector's going to stay with me." No. And then he started calling my mother a bitch every day she came from work, and he'd be sitting on the couch waiting to just call her a bitch. And I'd said this numbers of times. And my mother started crying, and I looked over at my father, and I said, "I don't think we should be doing this." Like, I felt bad, and I didn't know what to do. And my mother was like, "Hector, you shouldn't be calling me that." And I looked at my father, and I kind of could shit, like, I don't think we're supposed to be doing this. And my father was telling me to call my mother a bitch. And this is when this whole cheating situation, she would come home working from Stanley Tools. But I wanted to say this because Julian told the teachers, because my teacher told me that he goes, "Are you sure? Did your dad pull a knife on Frankie?" And I go, "No." He goes, "Are you sure?" Because I said, "Are you sure?" Because Julian told the teacher that your dad pulled a knife on your brother Frankie. And my teacher, Miss Lowry, told me that Julian had said that. And I remember coming home, and I was like, "Julian, what the fuck did you just say? Did you just say Dad tried to kill Frankie, pull a knife on him?" And I was angry at Julian. And I was scared that our family was all going to be broken up. I was scared that we were all going to be scattered, because my mother had no job and no money. My dad committed suicide, and we were all going to be broken apart. We weren't going to be a family anymore. We were coming home from school. We get to watch television. We get to play video games. You get to have neighbors in the front yard and the backyard. I did not want to go live in an apartment complex, and my mother never wanted that. My mother used to dread that all the time. That apartment life is a very poor, sad life. You don't want to go live in apartments. My mother used to despise apartments all the time when I was growing up. She always used to express that to me. She goes, "No, tienes un casa para allá, vives en apartamentos. Es muy feo para allá. It's real bad in the apartment life." And it is. But this makes a great, whoever is investigating this, whoever wants to look into this more, take this information. I just gave you this knowledge of documentation information that's probably going to put a lot of more things more clear and you to look more into. Obviously, this information, whoever spent this money, whoever did, it's all lost information and what they did to me. But I needed to say something on behalf of my mother, and I think it's important. My mother, I do remember shrugging it off, but my mother told me 100% about this. I'm going to try to remember, hopefully in 6 months, 3 months maybe, it'll be more clear and draw a picture of it. My mother's no way in state to remember. Julian probably can't even remember that. I'll try. Maybe you could show Julian the drawings and be like, "Heck, Julian, do you remember your mother taking you to school and she said that in front of the front desk and said you were a twin? Do you remember that?" That's the only way you can, because if my mother's mental state is gone, I doubt Julian at 5 years old or 4 years old can remember. I don't remember a lot of things very vaguely when I was 4 or 5 years old. Very, very vaguely at 4 or 5 years old. I highly doubt Julian has the memory capacity to try to remember that. And I know my mother doesn't, because she's not in any mental state. She won't be able to. a lot of people can't even when they're in good mental states. It's hard to remember something like that happened, something that happens 35 years ago, and it's just a daily routine, it's just a daily activity, and someone expects you to remember something like that because you do daily activities all the time. But it's worth looking into. I don't know if Lindsay Wessinger is involved as a detective or police officer or whoever's involved, Child Protective Services, whoever may be, please look into this. This makes it even more worse to what these transgenders and these homosexuals did. And it also makes my dad look really bad. He's a nurse. Lucio also looks much more worse. Let me tell you something. My mother gave him the truck. She gave him a truck, and it was supposed to go to me. Instead, he got a brand new car and truck. And Julian told me this, saying that he took it to Mexico. He took it to Mexico, and when they took it to Mexico, he said it was all ripped up and broken and rusted and broken. It was all torn apart. It was all torn apart. And he took it to Mexico for himself. He was picking up the rent money, is what my mother told me. And when I was living there, he was charging the other guys that were living there money there. He was making profit off of it. And he was controlling my mother. And he also raped. And this is what I don't like, because I'm telling you the truth. Julian heard, let me tell you something. Julian heard Lucio screwing my mother because I talked about it with him. I said, hey, did you hear Lucio fucking having screwing mom? I said, what the fuck is he? Because I told Julian about it. I was so stressed out about it. I said, hey Julian. I said, Julian, did you hear this? You hear me have sex with mom? She had her leg rained over. I told him that. You can tell Julian this. And Julian was like, yeah, I heard that too. Julian would be able to remember that. I had a conversation about this with him. And the reason I don't trust Julian with this is because several years later, I was like 15, before that, he had sex with my mother. She got her leg rained over. I was living at his apartment. I was 27 years old. And he said, do you still talk to Lucio? He goes, no. And he said something, Lucio likes to buy those Mexican crackers. That's just his thing. It's just his thing. Lucio likes to buy those crackers. And he said something positive about him. And the way that he said positive something about him is that if he was trying to say, oh no, that's just kind of Lucio's thing, whenever time I was around, it was just his thing. He always bought these crackers. It was like Mexican, real Mexican cheap crackers that they have at the Mexican store. They're not cheap, they're just different taste, different style. It's a Mexican snack that they have. You go to the Mexican stores, they have snacks you'll never find anywhere else. Well, he used to buy a certain type of crackers and candies, or some type of cookies that Mexican cookies, and that he used to buy it and eat. And me and Julian didn't like them, but he noticed that he particularly liked them. But I wanted to say that because he said it like he was trying to delight him. So that's why I can't trust Julian. Because why are you saying something positive about him when he's screwing my mother in my dad's house and he has a leg rained over if you're gay? Well, it means Lucio's bisexual, or is Lucio gay? He has to be. He's had sex with my mother, so then he has to be bisexual. The most he could be, he can't be gay, because gay, it means you're only having sex with men. So he's bisexual. He's having sex with, is he bisexual or is he gay? My father had sex with my mother, and none of the biological kids are his. So does that make him gay, or does that make him bisexual? What does that make him? You just switch over whenever you want to switch over so you can get what you want. And are you willing to have sex with a woman, but you're really gay? That's maybe what he did. The same thing my dad did. He's willing to have sex with my mother, but he's really gay. Is he the biological son? Is he the biological son? Is he the biological son of Marco? I don't think he is. He might be. He looks like him. I mean, he looks like him. Is he? So, God, they fucking got me bad. I mean, there's no hope. all these white people and these transgenders and gays are stripping everything from everyone. That's all they're fucking doing. They're not doing a fucking goddamn. They feel so empathetic about this faggot. The entire school knew about this when I was 5 or 6 years old. The entire school knew about this. All through grade school about Frankie being raped by that guy. They all knew about it. The neighbors, Rosie, they all knew about it. My mother didn't and my father didn't. They kept him in the house. You're telling me that you keep him safe, but you don't know about the identical twin for 10 years? For 5 years? My mother's working 10 hours for 7 years, from the age of 5 years old to 12 years old. All up until from the moment I'm born to 12 years old is what I knew my father as. Then he commits suicide. So you're telling me during that time, I'm 5 years old when Frankie gets raped. 4 to 5 years old when Frankie gets raped. So for 7 years, they keep him safe. He doesn't go to jail, lives in a house, they keep giving him work, jobs. He's taken care of. He's a good guy now. You know, he changed his life. You don't have to go to prison. Keep him in a house, give his wife a job, and then and that's how he gets away with it. My mother has another child somewhere, so it takes several years to investigate that. I don't even know, from the age of 5 years old to 12 years old, did they ever investigate that? Did anybody know about it, question it? Or was it only when my dad committed suicide? Because I know, if nobody investigated it, I know for sure someone at 12 years old, when my father committed suicide, there had to have been unearthed information. Julian's a twin. Who took the twin? Because I talked about this, that there was a nice black lady that was at the nurse's front desk when my dad committed suicide in the first hospital I went to. And Ken and Sarah showed up and they charged at my mother, and she was near the window. There was no conversation. There was no conversation, and the black lady looked at the computer screen and she goes, "Yeah, I see you coming up. I see you coming up." And it was Ken Cooper and Sarah. They didn't have a conversation, and my mother was like this in the corner looking, and her eyes are very, very deep, dark, and angry, like a mad mother. And she was sitting like this, like, I mean, just looking at Sarah and Ken. And Sarah Cooper, every time when she showed it to me, she goes like this. She goes, "Bitch, like, it's just stupid. You're just a Mexican." That's exactly how she. And Ken Cooper looked at my mother, and I talked about this. That I already talked about this in the elevator. And Ken Cooper signaled to Frankie to turn on my mother. Frankie, and I saw this, and I saw Sarah as the elevator was being closed. The signal, and this is when my mother kind of checked Frankie, because she noticed that Frankie was kind of turning on my mother. Frankie's in a lot of under control. Remember how many times Frankie's being raped? That's how the police department works. That's why they want to try to glorify it, because you're going to erase that part too. But I wanted to make this video because they're beating the shit out of me at all these places to try to cover up and lie what had happened and completely erase and change the story. That none of these things happened, and that they only happened because they were really just good people. That's not what happened. That's not what happened. And they're beating me to get me to believe and say that. And they're not going to stop until I do, so that they can get away for the president and what is happening. But this birth certificate is going to be the most primary thing that y'all need to look at. Julian, if it says his twin, why didn't anybody at the school say anything? Why didn't anybody at the school say anything? Gosh, there's no hope. It just makes me think of how bad this really is. There's no hope that my mother has anything to do fight. She just has to accept whatever you give me in life. I have no choice because you have so much control. I can't defend myself. I just give you my pussy. I just give birth to babies. You see, that's what women do, and that's what mothers do. And you see, you see Michael Jack, I gave you a car, and then you see Hector's the enemy. Yeah, Ken Cooper was the boss. You see how white power works? But I think it's important for me to talk about. Look into this. Look at Julian's birth certificate. Look at Julian's birth certificate. If it says twin, It is going to tell you that all these people that looked at their birth certificate, nobody said nothing. But this is document information that is on paper. So look into it, whoever's in charge.